She was homeless and abandoned. Until a millionaire stepped in and changed everything. She was just another face in the crowd, silent, shivering forgotten on a rainy New York sidewalk. He was a wealthy architect with everything, yet something about her made him stop cold. No begging, no words, just a glance that pierced through a lifetime of silence. What happens when a man with nothing to lose meets a woman with nothing left? This isn't a love story. It's a story of dignity, second chances, and how one act of kindness can rewrite two lives forever. Stay with us, because what starts as a glance becomes something neither of them ever expected. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. Lucas Bennett wasn't the type of man who paused. Every minute of his day was scheduled, every step purposeful. As one of New York City's most celebrated architects, his world revolved around structure, symmetry, and precision. Even his emotions had been compartmentalized long ago, tucked away in clean corners of his mind. But that evening, wet, cold, and humming with the distant noise of the city, something shifted. The charity gala at the Waldorf Astoria had been the usual affair. Glittering gowns, expensive wines, handshakes, and hollow speeches about making a difference. Lucas had smiled through it all, sipping from a glass he never quite finished watching. People donate small fortunes to causes they'd forget by morning. He'd done the same, wrote a check, posed for a photo, and drifted toward the exit with little thought, until he stepped outside. Rain had just fallen, leaving the sidewalks slick and reflecting the city's neon lights in dazzling fragments. Lucas pulled his coat tighter and started walking, not toward his driver, but away from the noise, as if something in the air was guiding him. That's when he saw her. She was seated just beyond the soft glow of a street lamp, huddled against the locked door of a flower shop long since closed. Her coat was too thin for the weather, and a gray knit beanie covered most of her hair. She didn't hold a sign. She didn't look up. She wasn't asking for anything. Lucas should have kept walking. A dozen others had. But something about the way she sat there, still composed, almost proud in her silence, made him slow his pace. It wasn't pity that rooted him to the sidewalk. It was curiosity. She wasn't like the others. He'd passed countless times in the subway or outside his office building. There was no outstretched hand, no shivering dramatics, just a woman, alone holding her own space in the world, as if she refused to vanish. Without thinking, Lucas approached. "Hey," he said, his voice soft, but audible. "Would you like something to eat?" Her head turned slightly. That's when he saw her eyes, sharp brown and quietly guarded. There was pain there. Yes, but not desperation. More like disappointment or exhaustion that had settled into her bones. "No, thank you," she replied, her tone firm but not harsh. Lucas hesitated, surprised by the clarity of her refusal. He wasn't used to being turned down, not in business, not in life. "I didn't mean to offend you," he offered. "It's just a cold night." "I'm used to it," she said, then looked away. Lucas stood there unsure. He wasn't sure why he had stopped in the first place. She clearly didn't want attention, and yet he didn't move. "I'm Lucas," he said, finally crouching down, just enough to meet her gaze. She took her time responding, then lifting a paper cup of what looked like cold coffee. She sipped, exhaled, and muttered, "Claire." The name hung in the air between them. It suited her, simple, strong, understated. Lucas didn't say anything right away. He simply watched her, noting the way she held herself. There was no slouch, no sense of collapse. She hadn't given up, not completely. She wore her hardship like armor, not chains. "How long have you been here?" he asked gently. Claire raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth curling into something between a smirk and a warning. "What are you doing, Lucas?" "Conducting street interviews, trying to collect stories to make yourself feel better." Her words had an edge, but they didn't sting him, not the way they were intended to. "I'm just curious," he said, calm and unshaken. "But if you don't want to talk, I won't push." Claire looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was playing some game. Then she turned back toward the street. "I don't need your pity," she said. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm fine." Lucas knew that was his cue to leave. He should have walked away. He could have stepped back into his perfectly constructed life without another thought, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded and rose to his feet. "All right," he said simply. "But if you change your mind, I'll be around." He walked to his waiting car, a sleek black sedan, idling by the curb. As the door opened, he looked back once more. Claire hadn't moved. She hadn't even looked in his direction, but somehow she lingered in his mind in a way no architect, investor, or magazine cover ever had. Her stillness, her dignity, her refusal to be seen as broken. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. The rain had long since stopped, but her image stayed with him, sitting alone beneath a flickering light, invisible to a city that never stops moving. For 2 days, he went about his life as usual. Meetings, blueprints, sight, visits. But Claire haunted him in quiet moments during his morning coffee, while glancing at his phone in elevators or hearing the cold wind outside his penthouse windows. He didn't know why. Maybe it was because she didn't ask for anything. Maybe it was because she didn't look broken enough to fit the image society assigned to the homeless. Or maybe, just maybe, he saw something in her that reminded him of himself alone, but unwilling to admit it. On the 3rd night, he went back. He didn't bring food. He didn't bring answers. He just showed up, unsure of what he'd find. Claire was there in the same spot, legs crossed, back straight. She was reading a tattered paperback that looked like it had survived its own storm. Lucas didn't speak. He simply sat down beside her. Claire didn't look up. But after a moment, she turned a page and muttered, "Do you really have nothing better to do?" Lucas smirked. "Apparently not." She shook her head. But this time, her voice had less bite. The edges were still there, but softened like rust, not barbed wire. And in that tiny crack of her defenses, something started to shift. Claire didn't know it yet, and neither did Lucas. But that quiet moment on the sidewalk was the beginning of something that would change them both forever. If you found this story touching, don't forget to share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next part. Coming up, an emotional journey that dives deeper into Claire's past and Lucas's unexpected transformation. Part 2, Layers of a Stranger. The nights in New York City had begun to turn bitter, with winds that scraped against the skin and slipped through even the thickest coats. But Lucas Bennett returned to that same sidewalk outside the flower shop, night after night, never knowing what to expect, never quite understanding why he was drawn back. Claire was always there. Sometimes reading, sometimes simply staring into the rhythm of the passing city, her presence as unshakable as the concrete beneath them. He never brought questions. He brought silence, the kind that didn't demand answers, only offered company. It was on the 5th evening that she spoke again, unprovoked. I used to come to this spot long before I ever had to sleep here, Claire said quietly, eyes fixed on the neon reflections dancing in a puddle nearby. There's a bakery down the block. I'd sit here with a blueberry muffin and a book. Lucas turned to her gently. What happened? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she ran her fingers along the edges of her worn paperback, the cover so faded it was impossible to tell what story she was reading. After a long pause, she finally said, I lost the job first. Then the apartment. Then the idea that someone would catch me when I fell. Lucas nodded slowly, careful not to fill the silence too quickly. She wasn't offering her story for pity, just releasing it, piece by piece. I was a librarian, she added, her voice softening. 14 years. I knew every regular by name, every child who needed help with their book report. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. At least it did to me. Why did you lose it? He asked gently. Budget cuts. Automation. Who needs someone to recommend a book when you can just ask an algorithm? She replied with a small, bitter smile. The day they told me, I didn't even cry. I just sat there wondering what I was supposed to do next. Lucas felt a hollow ache settle in his chest. He had lived in a world where failure was buffered, where a bad deal meant bouncing back with another. Claire had lived in one where a single misstep unraveled everything. Did you have anyone to turn to? He asked. Claire exhaled through her nose. A brother I haven't spoken to in 7 years. We argued after our mother's funeral. I had friends, but they had their own problems. And when you lose your apartment, your phone, your access to the internet, suddenly you disappear. It's terrifying how easy it is to vanish in this city. Lucas listened, absorbing every word, not just with his ears, but with something deeper. He had built towers that reached the sky, but this was the first time he was witnessing how far someone could fall and still hold on to their dignity. You don't look like someone who's given up, he said. She chuckled low and dry. What does that even look like? Lucas' messy hair, wild eyes. Maybe a sign around their neck that says, I quit. Giving up doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just means waking up and not expecting anything anymore. Lucas didn't try to comfort her with hollow optimism. Instead, he shared a piece of himself. I never had to fight for survival, he admitted. But I've spent most of my life building things that make me feel less empty. Even success gets quiet when you're alone. Claire looked at him for the first time in several minutes. Are you saying you're lonely? Lucas, he hesitated. I think I'm saying, I've built a beautiful life I don't feel connected to. And maybe meeting you made me realize that. Claire didn't reply immediately, but there was a shift in her expression. Something softened, almost imperceptibly. The wall she had constructed over months, maybe years, cracked ever so slightly. The next night, she wasn't in her usual spot. Lucas felt a strange kind of panic walking down the block, scanning the storefronts. He didn't know what he'd say if he saw her, or how long he'd wait if he didn't. But just as he passed the corner bookstore, he spotted her sitting on a bench, farther down, sipping from a cup of hot tea. You changed locations, he said, approaching with a faint smile. Claire shrugged, felt like a change of scenery. He sat beside her without asking. They didn't speak for a while, and the silence wasn't heavy. It felt comfortable, like the beginning of trust. I think people believe being homeless is about laziness or addiction, she said eventually, but really, it's about being forgotten. The world moves around you, People stop seeing you. You start to forget yourself too. Lucas turned to her. I see you. It was a simple statement, but it made Claire's eyes shimmer, not with tears, but with something dangerously close to hope. Over the following days, their conversations deepened. They talked about books, classics, thrillers, poetry. Claire had a way of describing characters that made them feel alive again. Lucas brought her a clean journal one evening, and though she didn't touch it right away, he noticed her tracing its cover when she thought he wasn't looking. One night, she asked, "Why do you keep coming back, Lucas?" He paused before answering, "Because when I'm around, you things feel real." She blinked at him, caught off guard by his honesty. "You don't know me." "Not yet," he said, "but I'd like to." Claire looked away, but she didn't pull back. And that, for her, was a significant step forward. By the 10th night, she began waiting for him. She didn't say it out loud, but Lucas could tell. The way her eyes scanned the street, the way she shifted slightly when he sat down, made it clear. He was no longer just a curious man with good intentions. He was becoming a constant, something rare and fragile in her transient world. In the layers of their evening conversations, something invisible but solid began to form. Trust, respect. Perhaps even something that neither dared to name just yet. Lucas wasn't trying to rescue Claire, and Claire wasn't asking to be saved. They were just two people, strangers by definition, but quietly rewriting what it meant to see and be seen. 1 year later, Claire stood behind the polished oak counter of maple and ink, the early morning sun, casting golden rays across the floor of the cafe. Her apron was worn. Her hands moved with practiced ease, and her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned her place. The girl, who once feared being seen, now greeted regulars by name, remembered their orders, and even smiled first. She had been promoted to shift manager 3 months earlier, a role that required both trust and leadership. Two things Claire never imagined she'd hold again. The apartment Lucas had given her was still her home, though she had since offered to pay full rent and insisted on covering utilities. Lucas, as promised, declined any financial repayment and reminded her gently, "You're already paying it back in the way that matters." She had begun volunteering twice a week at a nearby shelter, not out of guilt or obligation, but because she now understood the unique language of those who had fallen through the cracks. She recognized the way someone clutched their backpack too tightly, the way eyes darted toward exits, the way a person answered fine when they clearly weren't. Claire didn't pretend to save anyone. She simply showed up, listened, and reminded them with her presence. You're not invisible. Her most powerful tool wasn't her paycheck or her stability. It was her story. She had started sharing it quietly, one-on-one. Sometimes over a cup of coffee, sometimes during a slow moment in the shelter kitchen. And each time she told it, she felt a little less ashamed, a little more whole. There was strength in remembering not to dwell, but to show others that they weren't alone in the dark. One rainy evening, Claire was sitting in the corner booth of the cafe after closing organizing paperwork. A young woman entered, barely 20, soaked to the bone and clutching a frayed canvas bag. Her eyes were wide, scared, darting toward the door, even as she stood frozen in place. Claire knew that look. She remembered it from mirrors and memories. She rose, slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey there," she said, gently. "We're closed, but you can sit for a while. Dry off." I'll make you a cup of tea. The girl hesitated, then nodded, too exhausted to speak. Claire led her to a chair and brought out a towel and a steaming mug, setting them down without ceremony. The girl clutched the cup like it was the last warm thing in the world. They didn't speak for several minutes. Eventually, the girl whispered, "I don't have anywhere to go tonight." Claire didn't flinch. "I've been there," she said softly. The girl looked up, startled. Claire pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I used to think I was beyond help, that the world had already decided I wasn't worth the space I took up," she said. "But someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That changed everything." The girl's eyes welled up. Claire reached across the table, not to touch, just to offer presence. "You're not alone," she added. "You don't have to do it all at once." Just then, the cafe door opened. Lucas stepped inside, pausing when he saw Claire and the young woman. His eyes met Claire's, and in that brief glance, a quiet understanding passed between them. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the counter, sat down, and waited. Claire turned back to the girl. "There's a shelter a few blocks from here. I volunteer there. I can walk you over if you'd like." The girl nodded slowly, the first sign of hope flickering in her expression. Claire stood and gathered her things. Before they left, she walked to Lucas. "She's staying at the shelter tonight," Claire said quietly. Lucas smiled. "You okay?" "I am," Claire replied. "Really?" Lucas didn't need to say he was proud. She saw it in the way he looked at her. Steady, full of respect, not for what she had overcome, but for what she had chosen to do with it. As Claire and the girl stepped into the rain, Lucas remained inside watching from the window. He saw Claire pull the girl's hood up, gesture warmly as they walked, her voice lost in the rhythm of the city. She wasn't just helping. She was guiding, one human hand reaching back to another. Claire no longer saw herself as broken or lost. She saw herself as someone who had traveled through darkness and now carried light. Not a spotlight, not a torch, but something steadier. A lantern she could place in the hands of someone else trying to find their way. In the months that followed, Claire continued to grow. She led workshops at the shelter, teaching resume, writing, and job interview skills. She partnered with Lillian to develop a part-time training program at the cafe specifically designed for women transitioning out of homelessness. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about building something real, brick by brick, with dignity and trust. One afternoon, Lucas visited the cafe for a late lunch. Claire wasn't behind the counter. She was sitting in the back corner with a group of 3 young women, each of them listening closely as she explained how to open a bank account and track expenses. Her face was calm, her tone confident. She looked like someone who had found her place not in spite of her past, but because of the resilience it had forged. Lucas didn't interrupt. He ordered a coffee, sat by the window and watched. He remembered the first night he saw her, silent, guarded, nearly invisible. Now she commanded the room not with volume, but with presence. She noticed him, just as she stood to leave the table. Their eyes met. She gave a small nod. He returned it. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic hugs or tearful goodbyes. Just the quiet acknowledgement between 2 people who had met at the edge of something broken and built something new in its place. What began as a glance in the rain had become a story of restoration, not just of shelter or work, but of humanity. Claire had found her footing, her voice, and her purpose. She had become the very person she once needed. And in doing so, she reminded everyone around her that sometimes hope doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives as a whisper and stays as a promise. It was just after sunset when Lucas walked into his apartment, his coat still damp from the drizzle outside. He stood near the windows, the city lights sprawling endlessly beneath him. But his thoughts were miles away, anchored to a woman sitting beneath a street lamp on Madison Avenue. Claire had become more than a passing concern. She was a presence steady and unresolved, living in the back of his mind long after their conversations ended. He didn't know exactly when the idea formed. Maybe it had been growing quietly from the first night she spoke his name. But now it pulsed with urgency. Claire had told him so much, trusted him in ways she rarely allowed others, and Lucas felt something shift within him, a need not just to understand, but to do something that mattered. He'd spent a lifetime designing structures to keep people comfortable. Now, for the first time, he wanted to offer shelter to someone, not just as an architect, but as a human being. The next evening, as he approached their usual meeting spot, he carried more than a warm drink. In his jacket pocket was a small brass key attached to a plain ring. Claire was there reading by the glow of a nearby streetlight, her coat zipped to her neck, hands tucked inside her sleeves for warmth. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he stood in front of her and cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began. Claire looked up cautiously. "Dangerous habit." He smiled, but didn't deflect. "I have an apartment in Brooklyn. It's not big, but it's clean, quiet. It's empty right now. I thought maybe you'd consider staying there for a while." Her expression hardened instantly, the walls she'd carefully dismantled beginning to rebuild themselves in a blink. She closed her book and looked up, jaw clenched. "I'm not a charity case, Lucas. I'm not offering charity," he said calmly. "I'm offering a door that locks, a bed, heat, a place to exhale. That's it." She stood slowly, crossing her arms. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve it," he answered without hesitation. "Not because I pity you, not because I think you're broken, but because I believe in you." Claire stared at him, stunned, silent by the sincerity in his voice. She searched his eyes, looking for a trace of superiority or ego. But she found none, just quiet conviction. "I don't know," she said, finally her voice brittle. "I'm not expecting a yes right now," Lucas said, reaching into his pocket and holding out the key. "I'll be there this weekend finishing up some repairs. If you change your mind, come by. No pressure." She didn't take the key. Instead, she sat back down and opened her book again. But her hands trembled slightly. As she turned the page, Lucas left it beside her, resting it gently atop the edge of her coffee cup lid. For the next 2 days, Claire didn't show up. Lucas told himself not to expect anything. But still, each evening, he found himself scanning the street with a knot in his chest. Had he pushed too far? Had he ruined something fragile by offering too much? On the third day, a knock came at the door of the small brownstone unit in Brooklyn. Lucas had been wiping paint from his hands when he heard it. He opened the door and found Claire standing there, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression unreadable. "I almost turned back 3 times, she said quietly. "But you didn't," he replied, stepping aside. The apartment was modest, a 1-bedroom with warm lighting and a faint scent of freshly cleaned wood floors. A small sofa sat under the window. The kitchen was functional, the bed made neatly with clean sheets. Claire walked in slowly, her eyes scanning every corner as if trying to memorize the details in case they vanished. "I don't know how to do this anymore," she murmured. "There's nothing to do," Lucas said. "Just be here. Just rest." She placed her bag on the floor and ran her fingers over the back of the couch, tentative as if testing for illusion. Then she turned to him. "Why me?" she asked. Lucas leaned against the doorway. "Because you're someone who hasn't forgotten how to survive, even when the world forgot how to see you. That matters." Claire lowered her gaze. "I might not be able to stay. I don't know if I can trust this." "That's okay," Lucas replied. "You don't owe me anything. Just take it 1 hour at a time." That first night, Claire didn't sleep much. The silence of the apartment was too quiet, too unfamiliar. She kept the hallway light on and lay on the edge of the bed, fully clothed, ready to run, if the warmth turned out to be a trap. But no one came to take anything from her. No one knocked. No sirens howled outside the window. Only the steady hum of the refrigerator reminded her that this space was real. In the morning, she found a note on the kitchen table in Lucas's handwriting. "Take your time. No expectations. There's coffee in the cabinet." Claire made herself a cup, sat at the small kitchen table, and stared out the window. The view wasn't much, just a quiet street, lined with parked cars and winter-barren trees. But for the first time, in what felt like years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. Over the next few days, Claire's movements around the apartment were minimal. She didn't explore. She kept to the main room, occasionally stepping into the kitchen or bathroom, but never quite settling. Lucas dropped by only when needed, quietly respectful of her space. He brought meals, books left, encouraging notes. He never stayed long, and he never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, Claire spoke up. "Do you think people really change? Or do they just get better at pretending?" Lucas looked at her. "I think people change when someone gives them space to try." Claire nodded slowly, letting the words settle. Then almost imperceptibly, she smiled. Lucas didn't push her further. He didn't need to. She had stepped through a door she wasn't sure she'd ever see again, and that was enough for now. The early weeks in the Brooklyn apartment were both liberating and disorienting for Claire. She had warmth, silence, and space, but no routine. Her body was used to discomfort, to waking before sunrise on the street, to clutching her bag in fear that someone might steal what little she had. Now the softness of a real bed made her restless. She still didn't unpack her bag completely. Part of her feared that if she grew too comfortable, it would all vanish. Lucas remained a quiet, respectful presence. He never hovered. Some days, he left food in the fridge with a simple note, "In case you're hungry." Other days, he was gone entirely, buried in work. Claire appreciated the distance it gave her, the dignity to feel like a guest, not a burden. Still, there were moments when the silence inside the apartment pressed down on her. It was in those moments that doubt crept in. What if this was just a detour before the street reclaimed her again? Then one morning, Lucas showed up with a manila folder in his hand. He didn't sit, didn't pressure, just placed it on the table beside her half-eaten toast. "I've been talking to a friend who runs a nonprofit," he said. "They help people restart after hard seasons. There's a place on here that's hiring a cafe downtown. It's run by a woman who believes in second chances." Claire stared at the folder like it might bite. Lucas raised a hand. "No pressure. You don't have to say yes. I just wanted you to have options." When he left, she opened it slowly. Inside were printed job listings, each accompanied by handwritten notes in the margins. She ran her fingers over the page that mentioned the cafe, tracing the sentence. No prior experience required. Flexible hours, safe environment. She hadn't thought about working in a long time. Survival had replaced purpose. But here was a small, strange invitation, just enough to stir something inside her she thought was gone. The following Monday, Claire found herself standing in front of the cafe's glass doors. It was a narrow, warm-looking place, nestled between two buildings in Lower Manhattan. The sign above read, "Maple and Ink." She could see the soft light from inside, the clink of mugs, the murmur of customers. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door. The manager, a woman in her 50s named Lillian, interviewed Claire without judgment. She didn't ask for a resume. Instead, she asked if Claire was ready to try. Claire nodded, unsure if that counted as confidence, but Lillian smiled and handed her a schedule. Her first shift began at 6:00 a.m. that Friday. The work was exhausting. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and she hadn't memorized the espresso settings or the breakfast sandwich options. But she arrived early, kept her head down, and stayed late to learn. Some of her coworkers looked at her with curiosity. Others avoided her entirely. A few whispered, probably wondering who she was, where she'd come from, why she was here. Claire ignored it all. The worst part wasn't the labor. It was the self-doubt. Every small mistake felt monumental. Every misheard order or spilled drink made her feel like an imposter among people who didn't know what it felt like to sleep on concrete. But she kept showing up. Lucas didn't ask how it was going. Instead, he simply kept the apartment ready, made sure there were fresh towels, and left small things she might need without fanfare. One evening, she came home to find a note beside the sink. "Proud of you. Don't forget to rest." She folded it carefully and tucked it into her journal. By the end of the second week, Claire had learned how to work the register, how to smile, even when her legs burned, how to stack the chairs in perfect alignment. And one Friday afternoon, Lillian handed her a sealed envelope. "Your first paycheck," she said. "You've earned it." Claire stared at it for a long time after she got home. It wasn't a large sum, but it was hers. Not charity, not a favor. Money earned with her own hands, her own time. She hadn't felt that kind of pride in years. Later that evening, she knocked on Lucas's door, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and the envelope tucked inside her jacket. When he answered, she smiled and handed him one of the cups. "I got paid," she said. Lucas smiled, stepping aside to let her in. They sat in the living room, the city humming quietly through the window. "I want to pay rent," Claire said suddenly. Lucas looked at her surprised. "I mean it," she continued. "I don't want to keep living off your generosity. I want to contribute. I want to stand on my own feet." He nodded slowly, setting down his cup. "All right," he said, "but I have a condition." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Of course you do. When the time comes, when you're able, don't pay me. Help someone else. Someone like you. Someone who needs what you needed. That's the only rent I'll accept." She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "I can do that." Claire's days grew fuller. Work became a rhythm. Her steps grew more confident, her voice stronger. She started laughing more. Lillian trusted her with opening duties. A few coworkers began warming up. She no longer flinched when someone touched her arm or called her name. Each evening, she returned to the apartment and sat by the window, with a cup of tea, sometimes writing in her journal, sometimes just watching the lights flicker across the skyline. She was no longer just surviving. She was living bit by bit, breath by breath. And though the shadows of her past hadn't disappeared entirely, they no longer ruled her. She had a key to her own door, a place to rest, a job to show up for, and most of all, a growing belief that she could belong in the world again. Conclusion and life reflection. The story of Lucas Bennett and Claire. The story of Lucas Bennett and Claire is not just about an unexpected meeting on a rainy New York sidewalk. It is about what happens when two very different worlds collide through compassion, vulnerability, and the courage to see beyond appearances. Lucas, a successful architect, living a structured, insulated life, never expected that a quiet woman sitting in the shadows would stir something deep inside him. But Claire, a former librarian, turned invisible by the cruel twists of life, held a kind of dignity and resilience that defied her circumstances, and that more than anything captured Lucas's attention. Their journey together was never about saving or being saved. It was about recognition, about seeing another human being not as a project or a burden, but as someone worthy of trust, of a second chance, and of space to heal. Lucas didn't offer solutions. He offered presence, patience, and sincerity. In return, Claire didn't immediately accept his help. She questioned it, tested it, resisted it, because when you've been overlooked for so long, kindness feels suspicious. But over time, through countless quiet gestures and moments of honest connection, Claire began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was not broken beyond repair, that maybe she still had something to give. Her transformation wasn't fast or easy, but it was real. From sleeping on sidewalks to managing a cafe and mentoring others, Claire's story became a powerful reminder that the road back to self-worth is paved with small, consistent steps, and someone who believes you're capable of taking them. Lucas, too, was changed. In reaching out, he discovered something far more valuable than success: the power of human connection. He had spent years building beautiful structures, but it wasn't until he opened the door to Claire that he helped build something lasting: a life, a purpose, a ripple of kindness that extended far beyond them both. Kenton, the deeper lesson here is this: every person carries a story, and behind every hardened glance or silent refusal is a lifetime of pain, pride, and hope waiting to be seen. We don't have to fix people. Sometimes all that's needed is to listen, to be present, and to believe in someone long enough for them to start believing in themselves. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to walk past those who are struggling to assume their situation is the result of poor choices or personal failure. But what if instead we paused just for a moment and asked, what if that were me? Or better yet, what can I do even in the smallest way to remind someone they still matter? Whether it's offering a cup of coffee, a conversation, or simply acknowledging someone's humanity, these are the things that restore dignity and rebuild lives. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story spoke to you the most? Have you ever had an encounter that shifted your perspective or reminded you of the power of kindness? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear and learn from each other. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful content like this, and inspires us to keep shining a light on stories that matter. Let's build a community where empathy leads the way.